Okay, we are live on YouTube. I will go ahead and mute myself and you may proceed.
Terrific. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see all my fellow members of the City of Ithaca Redistricting Working Group. We're going to run through a little bit of business first before we open the program today to public comment on the proposed plan, which was released at the end of last week for folks in the City of Ithaca to give reactions to us as we continue our work on the subject of redistricting. My name is Hank DeLay, and I have the pleasure of serving as chair of the City of Ithaca Working Group. We'll start by just taking attendance for the other members of the working group. I see that we have Jared Pittman. Say hi, Jared. I see you on the screen and present. Chris Prue, present.
Everybody.
Katie Sims, present. Seth Murtaugh is the fifth member of the working group. He is unfortunately not able to be with us this evening. He has, however, gone through the minutes and indicated his approval of them. So that's the next order of business on our agenda tonight, is the approval of minutes from the meeting on March 15th, 2022. The minutes were distributed to the members of the working group last week. So may I have a motion for their adoption? Moved by Jared, seconded by Katie. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Next on our agenda this evening is an update on the Tompkins County Independent Redistricting Commission. I have also the honor of serving as chair of the County Redistricting Commission, and we have worked hard to see that both groups have shared information together. I'm delighted that both our staff director for the city working group, Ruth Aslanis, is with us this evening, as is Greg Potter, who is the staff director for the County Redistricting Commission. Both groups have shared information, and we have also held a joint public input session on January 25th, inviting comments from the public on the general theme of redistricting, focusing that night on the City of Ithaca districts. The County Commission is really looking to the work of this body, the City Redistricting Working Group, to provide important information to the County Commission as it looks at redistricting the maps for the county legislature. The county population has grown not as rapidly as the city population. And you might say that if you were to divide up the existing 14 county legislative seats and look at the population of them across the board, the city new population of 32,000 plus would generate about 4.5 seats. In other words, full 4 seats, which they have now in a map that has city legislative districts completely contained within the city boundaries. But in fact, they would spill over a little bit into the rest of the county. So at our last meeting of the County Independent Redistricting Commission, the County Commission focused quite a bit of its work on alternative county maps for legislative sizes of 15 and 16. We have a number of criteria that apply to both the city work and the county work, and I'll go into that in just a minute. But we're trying to provide as much coordination between the two groups as possible to make it as easily understood to the public as we can, as well as to making it as efficient for the administration of elections going forward. The working group has been meeting since we were first appointed in December. We have had guidance from the city attorney in terms of the criteria that we are to follow in our work. I've mentioned our appreciation for the staff of the city that has been working with us, particularly Ruth Aslanis, the Geographic Information Systems Administrator for the city, the Chief of Staff to the Mayor, Faith Vavra, I should say, and also the Assistant City Attorney, Victor Kessler. New York State has made very clear its criteria for local redistricting. In fact, as recently as just last year, the state legislature amended the municipal home rule law in chapter 516 of the laws of 2021 to set forth new and revised standards for local redistricting all across the state. And what are those standards? Well, the most important standard, of course, is equal population across districts. Now, we are given a little bit of flexibility here, but not very much. In fact, the legislation that was adopted last year narrowed the amount of deviation that is permissible between the largest district in the redistricting process and the smallest district in population. It had been for many years, in fact, for decades, deviation permissible of 10%. That is, theoretically, you might have had one district that had population approximately 5% above the average for all of them, and another district that was 5% lower than the average of the population. The change in the municipal home rule law last year narrows that deviation to 5%. And that is a very small number. In other words, it means that you might be able to have a district of 2.5% higher and another district of 2.5% lower, or just so the example is clear, one might be 3% higher than the average, as long as no other district was more than 2% lower. Has to be maintained within that 5% criterion. So what is the the average population of wards in the city of Ithaca? We presently have 5 wards, and with a population of, as I said, a little over 32,000, that means that the average population is roughly 6,421. Now that's a big number, but when you think about a 5% deviation, that takes it down to about 320. And when you think of the amount that could be spread on either side of that average, it's a very small number indeed, especially when we are constrained to use census blocks as the units of population within each of the wards. The U.S. Census Bureau is the entity that establishes the census blocks that we are required to use. And some of the census blocks in the city of Ithaca are very large indeed. In fact, we have some that are over 2,000 in population just for a single census block, others 1,900, 9,970, and so forth. And of course, there are some very smaller ones too. There is considerable variation across the city of Ithaca in what we see as the density of population. And as we work to establish new boundaries for the individual wards, we are constrained to use the census blocks that are available to us. So that's the very first criterion and the most important one. When I list a number of other criteria, they are in descending order of priority, and it's the state of New York that establishes that descending order of priority. The working group, as we have developed the proposed map that is under consideration this evening, has made it a point of going through each of those criteria, each of these criteria that I'll mention the rest of them in a moment, as we consider proposed changes. So what are some of the other criteria? The second most important criteria is protection of minority voting rights. And here the state statute says the district shall not be drawn with the intent or result of denying or abridging the equal opportunity of racial or language minority groups to participate in the political process or to diminish their ability to elect representatives of their choice. So that is the second criteria that is significant. Third, contiguous territory. Each of the districts must adjoin each other in some fashion. There can't be any splits between them, linking something from one side of the city to another piece and another part of the city without at least a channel between them. Fourth, they must be compact. And here the term is districts shall be as compact as practicable. And practicable means that the litigation that has occurred on redistricting means that the burden of proof is showing that they are indeed as compact as they can be, not as non-compact as you can get away with. So that is our fourth criterion. Fairness in the political arena. And here I'm going to stress again the words of the state statute. Districts shall not be drawn to discourage competition or for the purpose of favoring or disfavoring incumbents or other political candidates or political parties. At no time whatsoever during the deliberations of this working group has any consideration been given to political favoritism, either for a political party or for an incumbent or for a non-incumbent. That subject has never come up during the course of our deliberations and is specifically prohibited under New York state statutes. Sixth, communities of interest. Existing neighborhoods and population groups and subdivisions shall be considered. And we have spent a considerable amount of our time looking at communities of interest and doing our best to see that they are recognized and given as full consideration as possible as we go forward. In consultation with our legal experts in Albany through the New York State Association of Counties and other groups, it has been made clear that student groups are in fact recognized as communities of interest. In fact, last year, the New York State Senate approved legislation specifically requiring polling places to be made available on college and university campuses where there were 300 or more registered voters. That legislation is today pending in the Assembly, but it has also been picked up by Governor Hochul as part of her submission of budget bills to the legislature for consideration in this budget period. Action, to the best of my knowledge, hasn't been taken on that as yet, but it is clear that student communities are recognized as communities of interest. The subject of voter turnout has been brought to our attention during previous public input sessions, both for this working group and for the county commission. And voter turnout is not an acceptable or legitimate consideration for redistricting. We have been specifically informed that we should consider students, whether they vote or not, essentially as children, even under the age of 18, not eligible to vote. And their turnout doesn't matter for purposes of redistricting. Although, as the governor's legislation and the Senate bill suggests, it's important for consideration by the Board of Elections in determining polling places. Lastly, election administration. Again, the statute says districts shall be formed so as to promote the orderly and efficient administration of elections. As far as the work of the city working group is concerned, that means being aware of issues associated with overlapping boundaries for city wards and county legislative districts. We are pleased that joining us this evening, as he has in other sessions with the county commission, is a member of the Tompkins County Board of Elections, Stephen DeWitt. And I certainly hope that Mr. DeWitt will give us some comments during the course of this evening as well. So those are the criteria that the working group is required to consider. Certainly, we appreciate the numbers of people who have come out and given us comments at the January 25th session. We take those into consideration, as well as persons who have submitted written comments via the website email address that has been made public by the city. At this point, let me pause for a moment and ask if any of my fellow members of the working group would like to make any comments on what we've covered so far, or any other subjects that they'd like to address before we turn in a few minutes to public input. Anyone? I see a couple of negative shakes of a head. Okay. Then let me ask Ruth if you could put up on the screen for a moment the map that shows the existing 5 wards of the city, and we can all both speak to the changes in population that are shown in that map. Okay. Thank you, Ruth. As I think everyone can see, there have been a number of significant population changes from 2010 to 2020, both in terms of the numbers of persons and also the percentage change. Ruth, do you want to comment on that at all, or
I can go over them if you'd like. I think, yeah, there's one comment, which is, as you can see, the area that is in the first ward is up 19%, which is quite a bit. Second ward, 7%. Third ward, 2 point something. The fourth ward is up 19.92, so it's 20% increase. And we show a smaller population in Ward 5, and some of that has to do with this area in here, where the census has taken these two previously separate blocks and consolidated them into this one larger block. So we needed to show it on this map. We did a 4 or 5, we chose 4, because it'll probably be its own, the majority of the area was already in 4, and probably the whole thing will end up in 4 potentially. So some of that increase, some of that decrease in 5 has to do with that little bit getting moved into 4 in our accounting between 2010 and 2020.
Great, thank you. And just for those who may be looking at this map for the very first time, the small numbers that are shown within each box are the new population numbers in 2020 for those particular locations.
Sorry, I may have created a slight confusion. I apologize for that. And this, I want to say the second chart is where it actually shows what the deviation is from the ideal 1/5 today.
Okay, thank you. So can we then turn to the proposed map that the working group put out for public consideration last week?
Yes, we can. Shows the boundaries, then the chart on top shows the current deviation, which does fall within the 5% as configured.
That's great. Thank you very much. And as everyone can see, again, there are some very large census blocks in terms of population. Up in the upper right-hand corner, for instance, the North Campus of Cornell University has a single census block with 2,245 students. Immediately adjacent to it, another with over 900 students. If you go down to the West Campus of the university, now in the purple area where Ruth Sarrow is showing, again, some very large districts, 1,975. Move into the College Town area, and again, with the apartment construction and the facilities there, you have districts with over 600, over one district with one census block with 899 persons in it. And then down along Route 79 on State Street, the College Town Terrace area, 937 persons in that particular census block. And then if we turn to the opposite situation, in the sense, especially looking over on the west side of the city, the west side has the least dense population in the city in terms of numbers of people per area, although it does have a couple of larger census tracts, such as 855, essentially in the West Village apartments area. These are the factors that have affected our work as the working group as we look to achieve the objective of the meeting the equal population standard. You can see that that has been done in the table that Ruth showed at the top of the map, where we meet the deviation standard of no more than 5% between the greatest population and the smallest population. In this instance, the proposed district ward number 2 with 6,593 districts is the largest of the proposed wards, while District 5 with 6,299 persons is the smallest. But we meet the deviation standard. I think it comes to what, 4.9 something in terms of the spread, Ruth? I'd have to add.
Yeah, I counted as much as it's less than 5.
2.66 and 1.92 together. And I think that's what comes out to about 4.7.
4.5 something, yes.
Right, right. So we've met that standard. They are all contiguous. There are no gaps within a particular ward. And they are as compact as we could make them, and while being practical about it. We have sought to recognize to the fullest extent possible communities of interest. We hope that the boundaries as are proposed here are reasonably possible to be overlapping with the work of the county commission as it establishes county legislative boundaries going forward. So let me again just ask if any of my colleagues on the working group have any comments that they would like to make at this point before we invite comments from the people who have registered to speak at this evening's meeting. No, I can only see Katie and Jared. I can't see Chris on my screen at the moment, so.
I'm good, Hank.
Nothing? Okay. Well, fine. Let's take the maps down then, and I'm going to go through the list of people who have registered prior to the start of this meeting. And the first one, who I believe was the first to sign up, was Robert Cantelmo. And Robert, if you're here with us, we'd be delighted to hear your thoughts.
Hi, Hank. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Thank you so much. I want to reiterate my thanks to the City Redistricting Working Group for their important and diligent work on these maps. It's cleared from the proposed map that you just walked the group through that you have strove to keep population figures as equitable as possible, and you have certainly improved upon the compactness of last decade's maps. I do have one comment and one question for the group this evening. First, on behalf of my constituents in the 5th Ward, I wanted to raise a point about communities of interest. While I appreciate that Fall Creek has been largely consolidated into the 2nd Ward, this new map does notably exclude the east side of Lynn Street and Cascadilla Park Drive. Lynn Street, of course, being in the Fall Creek neighborhood and divided down the middle of the street, while Cascadilla Park Drive, sharing an identity as part of Fall Creek. The second issue I wanted to just quickly mention was I had also received questions from constituents asking the working group if they plan to make public any other draft maps that were discussed. There was concern in previous years that several options had been made available for review, and the public has suggested that they would appreciate an elaboration on the working group's decision in that regard. Thank you very much for your time. And again, I really appreciate all the work that you've put into this.
Well, thank you, Robert. Thank you for being with us this evening. And thank you for coming out to one of our previous public input sessions. Very much appreciated. Just for background, I will only note that the working group throughout the course of our deliberations has looked at least 18 different maps throughout this process. And it's been throughout a work in progress as we have moved closer and closer to meeting the various standards that we've identified as required. So I don't think we're going to be sharing 18 maps with folks, but the comments that everybody makes tonight certainly are going to be given full consideration when we meet again in 2 weeks to consider any further revisions. The second person on who registered is Veronica Pillar. And if Veronica, if you're with us, we'd be delighted to hear from you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic, thanks, Hank. I'll keep it short. I had essentially the same things to say that Robert did. First, thank you, you and the whole working group for taking on this really difficult task. Because I know it's tough to sort through, and I think it's probably impossible to come up with a map that makes everyone happy. I think I've been hearing the exact same constituent concerns pretty much that Robert had. And I wanted to raise the Lynn Street boundary as a weirdness as well. I'm not asking for anything in particular because, like I said, you got to balance lots of concerns. But having lived on one side of the street, it just seems, and especially with it being such a quiet street, it's not separated by a lot of car traffic or whatever, it does feel very odd for it to be split into two wards. Not just, I know it always has, or not always, the last 10 years it has been on the 100 block, but going down the whole street does feel oddly cutting through a quiet community. That said, the cuts have to be made somewhere. I'm commenting on this because that was my home for 5 years. So, but take it or leave it. And thank you again, no matter what you come up with.
Well, thank you, Veronica. Think of it as maybe Lynn Street gets 2 representatives on Common Council. It can be a positive. Okay. Third on my list is Jorge Defendini. Jorge?
Hi, everyone. I signed up previously before. I'm a little bit sick today, so I'll try and keep it brief. But I just wanted to echo the thanks that previous folks have and all the work that you guys have done, and echo that I really do appreciate the working groups. The working group's consideration of considering students as a special interest group to keep in mind when designing these maps, and for making it the 4th ward a friendly area for college students to run in and serve on the Common Council. I think our city has a very long history of doing this, and I'm happy to see it continued. And I just wonder if there's any room for commentary about how the city or folks in the broader community can work on doing voter engagement with college students and trying to get them registered, whether it be in on years or off years for presidential elections, where voter turnout is typically higher, and if that's come into conversation or consideration at all. But all in all, I am pleased to see what these maps have turned out and appreciate the work that you guys have done. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Voter participation is obviously important, and it's a major consideration for democracy. Certainly needs to be a focus of attention here in Ithaca as well as across the nation. Again, it's not really a subject on redistricting per se, however, where all persons, whether they be students or not, are considered equal as in population. Next, I have on my list Cynthia Brock.
Hi, Hank.
Hi, Cynthia.
Thank you. I'm going to chime in with everyone else and express my deep gratitude to the entire committee for all the work that you've done. I'm actually quite impressed with the design that has been put forward for consideration. You've definitely prioritized the criteria that was set forward. I think the neighborhoods are very cohesive. And does keep interest groups or not just interest group, but neighborhoods, community groups together. So I really appreciate that. I do have just some observations or perhaps suggestions that might be considered. One of the suggestions I wanted to offer was, would you consider adding Stewart Park and the golf course and the DPW facility to Ward 2. If you recall from my previous comment, I described just the sheer abundance of infrastructure issues that the first ward has to address just because of its sheer size. So distributing that park area to Ward 2 would have no impact on the population, but would distribute the workload a little bit among the various wards. The other suggestion I thought you might want to consider is, I see that there is a little area around Prospect Street that had previously been attached to the South Hill neighborhood, and I see that's attached to Ward 2. From a City of Ithaca representative standpoint, that area with regards to development, design, zoning is typically included with South Hill. It is definitely a consideration when we think about traffic and zoning. When I think about new development of Emerson and the impacts it's going to have on that little Prospect Street neighborhood, there would be a natural barrier in 6 Mile Creek, and keeping that with South Hill, I thought that might be something you'd want to consider. And if there needed to be a population redistribution for second ward, which I really don't think so, because I think it is slightly higher than the other wards. I'm looking at the neighborhood around GIAC and BJM as a neighborhood that would stick together. So I see these three little triangle blocks of 20, 71, and 77 that might be attached to Ward 2 there instead of Ward 1, if you needed to, redistribute some population there. The other comment I just wanted to put out for consideration is, I wondered if the committee had looked at how the population might be distributed with regards to median property values, with regards to racial demographics. I noticed that the Ward 5, which would basically have the highest median property value for a single family home in the city. 10 years ago, the median value of that neighborhood was $300,000. That was 10 years ago. I suspect it's much higher now. So it would really consolidate that population into one ward. Not necessarily a bad thing, but I just wondered if that was something that was being considered. And likewise, the first ward basically would represent most of the existing affordable housing parcels in the city, except for some of the new ones that are coming up. I think about Titus Towers, Northside Apartments, West Village Apartments. The Spencer Road neighborhood has the most affordable single family home property values, all of that consolidated into one ward. So you end up with some very significant segregation, too strong a word, but huge disparity with regards to single family home values between Ward 1 and Ward 5. So thinking about that, it's just something I'm observing as a consideration. So, but other than that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for all of your work. This is a challenging puzzle to put together. I think you've really done a thoughtful job, and I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you very much, Cynthia. Really appreciate it. And every one of those comments that you've just made and those by the previous speakers, we'll be going right through them in detail at our next meeting. Melody, can I ask if anyone else has registered to speak with us this evening?
At this moment, we do have 2 other participants who were not previously registered, one of which has commented to state that they are just here to observe, and the others are Acting Mayor Laura Lewis. So.
Well, certainly if the acting mayor is with us, we'd be delighted to hear from her. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Hank, and hi, members of the working group, and thank you for the thoughtful work you have done. I've heard a number of the same questions and comments that Robert Cantelmo and Veronica expressed. So I'm here basically to listen, to understand your thoughtful process and the criteria that have been used. This is a tough puzzle, as has been said, to pull together every decade. So I don't have any questions at this time. I'm still absorbing some of these lines. I do recall years ago when I was carrying petitions on Farm Street. I believe there is a line down the middle of Farm Street where one part of the block, part of the street is in one ward, the other side of the street is in another ward. And that can at times be awkward and challenging. And yet it seems to work. So these changes can be challenging. I believe they've been thoughtfully dealt with. So thank you for your work. I have no specific question to ask at this time.
Thank you very much, Laura. And yes, wherever there is a boundary, the street that functions as the boundary is split right down the middle. So it happens in quite a few places around the city. Let me then turn to my other colleagues on the working group to just see if anyone has a comment that they would like to make now that we've heard from the various speakers this evening. Anyone?
Maybe I'll just
Chris?
start. Right, you know, as Fifth Ward rep to this working group, I've heard similar feedback around Lynn Street and Cascadilla Park. I mean, I know Lynn Street is particularly challenging because that census block is combined with University Avenue. So when we take a look at that, we'll have to, it's not just a few blocks, right? It's like over 500 people. So I know that is a big factor that's driving this, but let's take a look and see if there's anything we can consider. And I don't know if Cynthia is still here, but, you know, we talked a lot about how to shape that Stewart Park DPW section. And I think we've looked at it both ways. That seems like a relatively easy thing to reevaluate, I think, in terms of comments around spreading just the workload around Common Council. And there's only 11 people who are affected there at the moment. So I'm sure we'll take that into consideration as well as your other comments. So yeah, I want to thank everybody. I think it was good to get the feedback.
Excuse me, I would like to invite member of the Board of Elections, Commissioner Steve DeWitt, to share any comments that he might have as well. Steve?
Thanks, Hank. Looking at the latest map that was put out by the working group, you know, having election administration being down at the bottom of the priority list, I find it very interesting that this map works pretty well for administering elections. There's a new law that you alluded to that's likely to be passed soon. That's regarding election districts on college campuses and voting on college campuses. And this map coincides very nicely with those needs. And when when we have to create election districts after your finalized city ward lines, we have to merge them with the current county ledge districts that are going to be in place for another 2 years. So, and it's quite interesting that the new ward lines that you have coincide pretty nicely with the county ledge districts. There's really only one mini district that I see there, and that's the 151 people that live in the City View, Wittenhouse, IPD area. That I think on a previous map, it said that those voters could go either into the new Ward 2 or the new Ward 3. And if they go into the new Ward 2, they create a unnecessary mini district with probably 50 voters or less. But if they go into the new Ward 3, the line is pretty coterminous with the current legislative district there. And I guess a closing comment. I mean, you guys are doing wonderful work and appreciate it. And if by any chance, by working with the county legislative district redistricting committee, that you can keep the ward lines coterminous with the new LD lines, that would be very helpful to us also.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Steve. We will certainly take all of that again into consideration. I just remind everybody that when you talk about a census block with 151 people moving from one place to another, again, given the 5% deviation standard, it's tough. Everything has to move a little bit one way or the other. So we'll see what we can do. Again, let me just ask my colleagues if they have any other closing comments that they would like to make. If not, our next regularly scheduled meeting will be on April 5th. And we will take all of your comments made this evening and others that we have received through email into consideration. Any comments from anybody? Jared, Katie, Chris? If not, I'll welcome a motion to adjourn. Moved by Chris, seconded by Katie. All in favor? Aye.